Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in the Gospel of Mark. We're going to take a look at the beginning of chapter 13. We're going to look at the first 13 verses in chapter 13, and we're going to look at the concept of judgment and the prophecy concerning the temple. Let's go to block 1 and take a look at the text. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." "Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they all should be fulfilled?" Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be Such things must happen. But the end is still not to come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes, famines. These are the beginning of the birth pangs. You must be on your guard. You will be handed over to local councils, flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, don't worry beforehand about what to say. Just say what is given to you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but it will be the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his own child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. The one who endures will be saved. Okay, we've got the prophecy of the destruction of the temple. And this is where a lot of liberals will not date Mark early because they don't believe that prophecy is possible. So they go, it's got to be dated after AD 70 because there's no way that prophecy is real. And like I've said before, I believe that Mark came 14 years after Galatians. So I go around AD 64, in my opinion, and that's prior to AD 70 and the destruction of the temple, because I do believe in miracles, and I'm not a liberal, but that's why you have discrepancies on the date, because liberals will not admit to a reality of prophecy, and therefore they say, well, it's got to be after AD 70, because how does Mark know about the destruction of the temple? Well, if you believe that a miracle is possible, if you believe in the realm of spirit, and I do believe in the realm of spirit, then you can date this gospel where I date it. I date it around 14 years after Galatians. Galatians is 50 or 51. Mark is, in my opinion, 64, 65 maybe, but prior to AD 70 when the temple was destroyed. Let's move on to block 2 and take a look at the commentary. And again, we're going to look at Ruckman, Edwards, and we're going to look at Hegel, because I think Hegel is important for noesis. And remember, in the second half of Mark, the theme is the journey toward noesis, the journey toward spiritual comprehension for the disciples. The first half was objective ministry to Gentiles and the Messianic secret, But the second half of Mark is about the journey of the disciples to noetic understanding, spiritual perception. Let's go on to block 2. Okay, block 2, let's start with Ruckman, and he starts with Isaiah 66. Heaven is my throne and earth my footstool. Where is my place of rest? And then he goes to Acts 7. Has not my hand made all things? This is a prophecy of the destruction of the temple by Titus in AD 70. Verses 3 and 4 lead us to the Olivet Discourse, and the Olivet Discourse concerns the second advent. For the second advent will be located at the Mount of Olives. See Zechariah 14. The disciples ask about the sign of Christ's coming, Matthew 24:3. So you've got the destruction of the temple and the second advent being discussed in this narrative according to Ruckman. Edwards shares that opinion, by the way. Let's go on to Edwards. Chapter 13 takes the form of a final discourse concerning eschatology, of the coming of the Son of Man in final judgment. But final judgment is prefigured in the destruction of the temple. See how Edwards fits those two together? And I like that. So final judgment is prefigured in the destruction of the temple. The context of the Olivet Discourse is the destruction of the temple. The only sign mentioned is given in verse 14 as the abomination of desolation, a final sacrilege before the eschaton. Mark's purpose here is to exhort the readers to faithful discipleship. We are reading of an apocalypse of coming judgment and the exhortation to watchfulness. The fall of Jerusalem is a prefigurement of the coming parousia. There you go. The fall of Jerusalem is a prefigurement of the coming parousia. I really do agree with both Ruckman and Edwards, but I kind of lean toward Edwards a little bit more favorably. Let's move on to Hegel, who I totally agree with. Okay. In Hegel, we're going to look at 4 additional aspects of noesis, 4 additional aspects of spiritual comprehension, spiritual perception. The noema is the intentional object as perceived and as judged. We perceive a worldview which can be collectively diagrammed as a intentional singular object. You know, Ross, when he presented the biblical worldview, it is something that we can visualize as an intentional object of faith and perception. It's always a concrete act of watchfulness. It's always posited as a single complex entity of signs and ideas. The ideas that make up the kingdom are gathered together mentally. Then we organize them in an interrelated model. And for a worldview, that model is always a circle. It's always a circle. And that becomes a singular complex mental image, a single complex mental entity of signs and ideas. It will include the prefigurements that are inherent within it. And that includes Ross's diagram as well. His diagram will include the idea of judgment, and he didn't write it in, but we can. We're supposed to work on it anyway. He said this is just a starting point. You should all be working on your own worldview. And, we don't share our worldview normally. We don't, step by step present our worldview to someone. That doesn't happen, but extremely rarely. So why? Why go through the process? And I think I have the answer for that. We go through the process because it becomes equated with what Paul called renewing the mind. How do you renew your mind as a believer? Well, by forming a mental image of a spiritual worldview. If you're building up a mental image of a spiritual worldview again, and again, eventually the neurons form a neuron chain, and eventually it'll fire so many times that it becomes hardwired. And I've done that with my worldview. My spiritual worldview has fired so many times, it will fire as a hardwired neuron chain. So we all get involved in the process of noesis. We all get involved in the process of spiritual comprehension and spiritual perception to build a spiritual worldview, because it's the best way to renew the mind. You know, if you go through that sign model that Ross gave us, and I have many times, but you know, go through it again, and again. Write it out so it's even remembered even better. But write it out again. You know, go over it again, and look it up on our the church's webpage, and watch it multiple times. But it'll get imprinted in your mind, and the whole purpose is to renew the mind as a Christological renewal of the mind. Now for me, I have a worldview that combines Hegel and Jürgen Moltmann, and mine's pretty complicated. If I can write it out on a single sheet of paper, but it works for me, but it's really pretty complicated. I've worked on it for years, and I guess if you went to the lessons on this channel, if you went to Rudolf Otto's The Holy, that lesson that I taught there on The Holy by Rudolf Otto, that's my sign model. And you're going to go, okay, yeah, it's way too complicated. It would fail in a sermon. Ross's model succeeds in a sermon. Mine would fail. But mine works for me, and I've fired it so many times that it is a hardwired neuron chain at this point in my life. I'm an old dude, and it is a hardwired neuron chain. My Christian worldview is a hardwired neuron chain at this point. But, and I love Hegel. Hegel went to Tübingen Seminary. Jürgen Moltmann, in my generation, he is the scholar emeritus of Tübingen Seminary. But Hegel, you know, back in the 19th century, that's where Hegel went, was Tübingen Seminary. He's one of those early theologians that came out of Tübingen Seminary. And but for my generation, it was Jürgen Moltmann that came out of Tübingen. But yeah, Hegel went to Tübingen. That's where he went, was Tübingen Seminary. But anyway, I follow for all my, well, I'll say that for most of my Christian life, I've followed Jürgen Moltmann, and in my graduate work, it certainly include Hegel all the way. So we've looked at noesis. Now let's take a look at logic, essence, and spirit. The new logos of God's righteousness is spoken by Christ in the Olivet Discourse, and it does include a context of judgment. We must take up the eidos idea of judgment into our sign model. Essence. The disciples ask for a sign that includes all of the eidos ideas, that would abbreviate all of the eidos ideas. The destruction of the temple will be such a sign. Spirit. The realm of positing within the realm of absolute spirit must be coupled with the exhortation to watchfulness. So, like I say, again, I'm going to put a big circle on my copy around Block 2, Note 3A for additional aspects of noesis, because the theme of the second half of the Gospel of Mark is the disciples' journey toward noesis. Christ is on his way to the cross. The disciples are on the way to noesis, and a better comprehension of what the Messianic identity means. That's going to wrap up a great beginning in 13. I really love this lesson. Very, very powerful on divine judgment. And we will continue in chapter 13 in our next lesson.